Hey guys, and welcome to your first INF 272 tutorial. In this tutorial we'll be doing HTML and CSS. So in order to do that, we're going to try and create this website, which is the car warehouse. And as you can see, there's just a header at the top and sections for different types of vehicles and a card for 3 cars under each vehicle type, and we are going to try and create that. So each car has a make, a model, a year and a price, and then a link to go and view specs, which is on some other website. It's not really important, it's just to show you guys how it works. Right, so HTML, as we've discussed in class, is hypertext markup language, and it is the way it's a language that is used to contain and structure content on the web. CSS is cascading style sheets, and that is used to style or define rules for the presentation of that content that you define in the HTML. So let's get straight into it. The way you create HTML files, or where you start off, is by opening a text editor. You can create HTML in any text editor such as Notepad, which isn't amazing because it doesn't help you at all with like hints or IntelliSense or anything like that. Or you can use more advanced text editors such as Visual Studio Code or Notepad++. We will be using Visual Studio Code. So I'll just go and open a new window. Let's drag that in here. Here we go. And let us create a new file. And we save that file under our own folder. It doesn't matter where you save it as anything. Typically you'll see index.html used very often. That's because when it sits on a web server, which we'll deal with later in this course, that most web servers default to serve up index.html or default.html files first. So that's typically the home page of your website, would always be called index.html. Okay, but it doesn't really matter, you can just save that. Okay, and there you have your HTML file. So the next thing to do is to start off with the basic structure of an HTML page. And it always starts with a document type declaration, doc type HTML, and then you start with your root node, which is the root of the document. Remember, HTML is like a nested tree, elements nested under other elements, and the root element is always HTML, or the root node. So you must make sure that your nesting is always right. You cannot have something like this, and sorry about that, you can't have something like this. That would be invalid HTML, because as you can see, the body isn't in its entirety nested within HTML, and that is a requirement to have valid HTML. So just make sure that you have your nesting correct. So each HTML document has a head and a body elements, and all the content is contained within body, and metadata and such is contained in head. So you would have something like meta char set UTF-8, which basically just defines the character set that your website will be developed in. You can also have title, and that specifies the title of your website, the little text that will be shown at the top of the tab in your browser, and also when you start working with search engines, this is the title of your website. So this is almost the header of the what Google will return when this page is indexed and searched. Okay, and then you have body. So for now we just go my content here and we save. If we then go to that folder, you can see this was my path where I saved that image. Here's the index. When you open that up, then you'll see that we have our HTML here. So we still have a far way to go to get there, but this is at least a start. So you'll see the title at the top, as I said, and your body is here. So what you can also do in a browser is you can right click and say inspect, and that shows you the elements that you just created. And it also interestingly shows the style associated with each element at the bottom. So we'll do more of that later on. So that's just the starting point. Let's move on swiftly to get some content into this page. So to start out with, we probably need to go and create that header. So we want to create a nice header that says the car warehouse. So we start out by going H1. So H1 is a header element, and you can get H1 up to H6, H1 being the most bold, most emphatic header style. So we want to give that a class, because a class is something that we can then use as a hook later on when we do the CSS and we want to style this element. Then we can use this hook or this as a selector, and then we say the car warehouse. Oops. Okay, we just want a closing tag. Here we have our header. So if we save that and we go and refresh our page, then you can see there's our header. Right, so now we would like to go and create our car cards. So if we look at where we want to get at, we'll style that header later on. I'll get to the CSS later on. I just want to get to the content first. I'm going to start. I'm not going to do all of these different sections all at once. I'm going to just start with the first row of cars, just so that you see, because if you can figure out this first row, this first section of hatchbacks, then it's basically the same for all the way down. The same thing all the way down. So let's start out with this first section. So let's just create a container. So a div is an element that you'll see a lot of this year. It is used for layout, so to contain elements and position elements, and basically to define the layout of your website. You will use div within divs and elements in that. So we'll just give that a class as well, again, so that we can use it in our CSS later when we style the page. So we call that a section, and this first section we will use to contain the hatchbacks. So we want that hatchbacks header, right? So to get that, we want a h2, which is a less emphatic style. We're going to just give that a class as well, just for in case we want to access that in the CSS. Right, and then we say hatchbacks. There we go. Now we also want a container div for the car cards, which is what I just call these cards, these little gray boxes that all the cars are contained in. I call them car cards. So I want to go and create divs for each one of those car cards. So again, we give them a class so that again we can access them in CSS. And there's a card box. So we're gonna have 3 cars, so I'm gonna create 3 of these. Okay, so let's start with the first car. So we want to have a title or like a header within the card to state which car it is. So we go for a less emphatic header. And our first car was a Hyundai Veloster. Right, and then if we just go and have a look at that page, we have a header and this is the page we want to get to. At the moment to think. After we save that, if we refresh, we look like this, which is very far from where we want to be. But anyway, let's just see what else we need. We need an image in that car box, and we would like to have like some sort of list of elements, so make, model, year, price. So in order to get this structure like this, we will make use of a HTML table. Okay, and then a link at the bottom. So we already have this, so we still need the image and the table and the link. Right, so let's do that. Image. So an image, you need a source, and the source is where you specify the path of the images. So on ClickUp, where I've uploaded this tutorial, I've also uploaded all these images. So I'm just going to show you how you pull these images into your folder. So the path you specify there can be relative or absolute. I don't want to go too technical with XPath, which is how you specify paths to images. So for now, you can just assume that if you go / and you specify a path, then that path has to be relative to your HTML page. So in other words, I need to copy my images in here, and then in here I need to specify a path to those images. Okay. So I'm just gonna go and copy those images in. I paste that in there, and if you look, then you've got all these car images in here. Okay, so that's what you would also need to do. And now I need to specify. So for the Hyundai Veloster, here is the image. So what you do is you follow the path relative to index.html. So that would be in our current folder. You just navigate down into images, and then the image will be there. So you go images, and then you go the name of the image. And which I think is a JPEG. Right, then if you don't provide a width attribute and a height attribute, then it will show in its original size. So if its original size is huge, then that's going to distort your car box completely, your car card. So I'm just going to specify a width of 320 pixels and a height of 160. Now there's an important thing to remember when you specify width and height when it comes to images, is that it needs to maintain the aspect ratio, otherwise it will completely stretch out and distort your image and make your website look ugly. So make sure that when you do specify the width and height, that you maintain the aspect ratio of the original image. Okay, then we're going to specify a table. So table starts with the table tag. That's the outer element of a table. And a table consists of rows and columns. So if we go and have a look at the table, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. Well, actually 5 if we want the link to be part of the table. So 5 rows, and for the first 4 rows we want 2 columns, but then the 5th row we want that column to be merged across the 2 columns. So the column span should be 2. So I'll show you how to do that. So let's start out with first creating our 5 rows. Okay, so sometimes Visual Studio Code does these weird indentations, but if you don't do the indentations properly, then the code becomes very unreadable, and that's not good when you're working with other people, and even yourself when you go for a break and you come back and it looks ugly, you can't read it. So a nice shortcut in Visual Studio Code is if you type in Shift Alt F, so you're holding Shift and Alt and you press F, then it formats your HTML page so that it looks readable again. All the indentations will be fixed for you. So you see how it does that. Just highlight Shift Alt F, and there we go. Okay, now for the columns. To specify a column, you've got TD for data cell, and there we go. But we want to make TD that is Hyundai. I'm just going to copy this. Okay, now for the final column where we've got a link to a page which contains specs about this car, we need only one cell. As you can see, there's only one data cell there, but that data cell spans 2 columns. So it's pretty simple to do that. You just specify a col span attribute and you say 2, and then inside of that you create link, a link with the href, which you can literally just copy from me. because that's just a link to any page. In an href you can link to another HTML page within your project or any other website that sits on the internet that's publicly available. So you can just do that. And if you wanted to open in a new tab instead of navigating away from your web page, then you can just set the target to blank. So these are attributes. It will say, it will go, when this link is clicked, it will navigate to this web page in a new tab of your web browser. But let's specify the text on the link, which will be these specs. Right. So let's save and go look at, once we refresh, and that is our first card. Okay guys, so now we would like to start styling this, because obviously it still looks very different from this. We would like to make it look pretty. So now you can clearly see the difference between HTML and CSS. This is the pure HTML, no style. This is with a CSS. Okay, so in order to include the style, we want to go and create a new style sheet, CSS style sheet. So to do that, we say file, new file, or you can just go Control N, and we're going to save that in the same folder as the index.html as style.css. So that is an external style sheet. Okay, and now you can just start specifying. But in order to apply these styles, whatever styles we're going to include in this style sheet, we need to have the HTML page reference that style sheet. So we go to the head tag, and inside of that head tag we're going to specify a link. We say the relationship is a style sheet, meaning that whatever you're going to include now is a style sheet of this HTML page. And we can say the type is text CSS. This you guys can pretty much just remember and memorize. It's not going to be any different. This is always how you include a style sheet. And then you have href. And this again is a relative path to, just like you had a relative path to your image, this is a relative path to your style sheet. So that you can just go style.css and close the tag, and there we go. So let's go and include a style just so that you can see that it actually works. So we can go dot, which if you use a dot, it is going to look for a class that's been specified. If I go main header, then whatever style rules are specified in here will be applied to all the elements in the HTML that have the class main header. So in this case we only have one element that has the class main header, and whatever we specify there will be applied to that element. Okay, so first of all, let's see what we want to be able to do with main header. We would like to position it in the middle, more or less, and have a border at the top, a nice black border, and nice big black text with sort of a white shadow. So let me show you how to do that. So first of all, we can either go in order to center this header, we can either go and do a text align center on the body element, but that would center all text in the body, and that we don't want. We just want to center this thing, so this header. So we can go display block, which means that the header is no longer inline, so it's no longer seen as an element in line with the text of the body. It is now a block element, similar to a div or a table. Okay, you can go and specify its position as a relative, which means it will be relative to the body or relative to the first absolute element. Then you have width, you can go and set to a certain percentage, so we went for 75%, which means this will be 75% width of the window in this case. Then we can go background, we want to make it nice and gray, so there's this format that you can specify color, which is RGBA. So we can go 200, 200, 200, which makes it gray, and the A is for opacity, so we go for a opacity of 0.7, which means it's slightly transparent. Okay, and then in this case we can make the main header text align center, which means that the text within the H1 tag will be centered. This is only necessary if you've defined main header as block. If this is inline, then the width of the H1 header will automatically be the width of the text, and it will just be positioned in line with whatever surrounds it. Okay, so here comes the trick now. If you go margin left auto and margin right auto, I'm just going to stop there, then that text should be centered. There we go. Okay, so it still looks slightly different because we don't have that border and we don't have the box shadow, but we can see that we don't have the text shadow, but we can see that the text has now been centered. The H1 is about 75%, so if you go right click inspect there, then the developer console in Google Chrome opens up, and you can see here you have the styles that you specified, and if you untick some of the styles, then you can see the effect that has. If you take away that, then you can see the effect that the style has actually on the content. So that's a really cool thing to use to debug your HTML and your CSS to see why things aren't working the way you want them to work. Alright, let's quickly move along and just give you some of the other styles. So I'm just going to paste this in here and run through that. Margin top 0, margin bottom 0 just means there won't be any margins above and below the header. Padding means that within the tag, before you get to the text, there'll be a 15 pixel padding all around. Now I've specified the font family, the font size, and the text shadow, which it's not really important. You can just follow this if you would like to do that. You can go and read up on text shadow if you want. So if we save that and refresh, then you can see we have those styles applied. Okay, I seem to have missed the border. So if we add the border style to that, so there we say border top. The 2 points is the width of the border. the ridge is the type, so that can be solid, or it can be a ridge, or it can be dotted, or it can, there's a whole range of styles, border styles, and then border color. So if I save that, go back and we refresh, then we have that, the style we want. So now you can see that the style is pretty much the same. Let me just close this, then you would see better. Okay, so now let's get to our car card. So first of all, we want to style the section. So that's the section that contains the cards, to make sure when we add more sections that they don't overflow and that they position themselves correctly. So for that we have to go dot section. This margin top means that there's a 30 pixel margin between the different sections. Width 100% means that the section is a full width of the screen, and height auto means that the section adapts its height automatically to its contents. Then we have the dot section header, which again would apply these styles on all the headers or all the elements that have the class section header. In our case, that will be all the header tags or all the header elements within each of the sections. So there we just wanted to define the font family and the font size. That's pretty self-explanatory. What I really wanted to get to was the card box. With the card box, there's various styles that have been applied here. So I'm going to run through them. So the first one is text align center, which is, if we look here, we can see that the text, this is an inline header. Remember how I said that this header, we changed the display to block so that we could center it relative to the entire page. This, on the other hand, is inline. So this is just in line with all the other content in this div. So if I go and say text align center on the card box is our div, right? Then all the inline elements within that div will be centered. Okay. Position relative, I've discussed above already. Width 30%. Define the width of the actual div as 30% of the width of the of its parent, and together with float, it would mean the float left. It would mean that you have boxes that could appear next to each other, because each one is 30% of the screen. So if they all float left, then you would be able to fit in 3 in one row. Okay, so margin left, margin right, we've discussed. This is not necessary. So the margin left 1%, margin right 1% is to just create some margin between the card boxes so that they don't, so that there's a bit of a margin between them. Okay. Float left I've discussed. Background is just a color that we've specified so that the card box can just have a bit of a different color. Border radius, this border radius is in order to make these, to round these borders. So you can go and read up more about it. I don't want to spend too much time on that. This isn't really necessary, it's just a nice to have. Border we've discussed already. And then overflow hidden. Overflow is a style which defines that if there's more content than the width and the height allows, then scroll bars will start appearing, unless you specify hidden, in which case it will literally just hide whatever content doesn't fit in that width or that height. Okay, so if we save this and we go and refresh, then you can see our card boxes have been created. The reason these are there is because we've copied and pasted, so we've got two other card boxes, but there's no content inside of them, so that's why these look like this, and this box is obviously full. Alright, so let us go and style the table. So you can see that it's starting to come together, except that this table has not been styled. Right here, I can show you the style of the table. Here we've got width 100%, which means the table will make up 100% of the card box that it's contained within. The margins aren't really necessary since we made the width 100%. Border collapse just simply means that the borders between each of the cells of the table won't be visible. Okay. Then just two other elements or style rules. Here we've got the dot card box table tr, which means the row elements within any table elements within any element with a class card box will have this style. And we basically say that we want the row within this table to also be 100%. But then we do the same thing, but for the cells we want them to be 50%, and we want that so that we've got, remember, we have two columns, and we want the one column to be half of the width and the other column to be half of the width as well. Okay, so if we refresh that, then we've got it looking as such. So this is getting really close. Now the last thing that we still need within that card box is, you can see here that the column on the left is styled differently from the column on the right. Okay, so the column on the left seems to have like borders at the bottom, like border lines at the bottom of each cell, whereas the columns on the right seem to have a different background. So how do we do this? I will show you. So CSS has this nice notation where you can specify an nth child. So what that basically means is it's a function that's called, now remember, the dot card box table td returns a number of elements that satisfy this criteria, this selector criteria. So this will return all table cells within all table elements that appear within the all elements that have the card box class. But the message that you should get from that is multiple data cells would be returned. Okay. Now nth child 1 means that the first data cell child of each table will have these rules applied to them. Okay, so in our case we want to take, just to show you, we want to take of each row, we want to take the first data cell and style it in one way, and the second data cell and style it in a different way. Okay, so first child we're going to style one way, we give it a border bottom, give it a background color. Second child we style that differently, and if we do this notation and we save, then we get what the style we want. Alright, and there we have our first box, and now we can simply repeat this for all the other boxes we have. Okay, so let me quickly do that, and you can all the different cars that I wanted and all the different sections that I wanted, and if I save and refresh, the only different thing that I've gone to add is a div to contain the car in. So you will see from the original one that we had, where we just had a card box, and we directly had the header. I've gone to put an intermediate div, and that's just so that I can specify an ID for the particular car. We're not going to use that in this tutorial, so if you didn't do that, that's not a problem. It's just ID is a more specific selector. So if you want to apply a style to a specific car, or a card related to a specific car, then you could have done that using ID. So I just wanted to show you that ID notation, but it wasn't necessary in this tutorial. Okay, so if we then go back to this and we refresh, then we have our different sections. Okay, so that's the end of our first tutorial. Please look through it, please access. There are many things that I just glossed over, so again, as we've stated in class, visit W3 Schools, and it has a CSS tutorial, an HTML tutorial, and most of these aspects that we dealt with in this tutorial are also covered and thoroughly explained by W3 Schools. Alright, have fun guys, bye bye.